Great, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the second webinar of the Domestic Violence Awareness Month speaker series. My name is Lauren Gorlick. I'm joined by Amy Jaworski from the SPCA. We're just going to wait a couple of moments as folks begin to log on, and then we'll begin shortly. All right, everyone. Well, it is 12 o'clock right now. Thank you again for joining us for the second webinar in our Domestic Violence Awareness Month speaker series. We're so happy that you chose to join us today. My name is Lauren Gorlick. I serve as the Community Relations Coordinator for Child and Family Services Haven House. I'm honored to be moderating today. I do want to just go over a couple of housekeeping items before we go into the meat of the presentation with Amy Jaworski from the SPCA. This presentation will go for about an hour. We'll have a 40-minute presentation by Amy. We'll go into a Q&A session and wrap up from there. So we'll be out about 1 o'clock. I do want to thank our sponsors, our lead sponsor, Alexander Professionals, as well as the many other organizations and businesses who joined us for this very crucial series that we're doing and we're offering to the community. So thank you all so very much. We are so grateful for your support. I also want to remind everyone that there is a chat function as well as a Q&A section too. So please include any questions that you might have there in that function. We will be sure to answer it come the end of the presentation. We also have a link to Child and Family Services Haven House website, as well as a link to Alexander Professionals and the SPCA as well. The link to Haven House does include our hotline number. It's our emergency hotline number, available 24/7. That number is 884-6000. My colleagues are there 24/7 to answer any calls that you may have for any situations. Any loved ones or friends. We're always willing to answer any questions about domestic violence at large. So at this time, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Amy Jaworski. Amy is a special agent with the SPCA. She's been doing that for 16 years. She has a background in criminal justice and animal management, and she is both passionate and dedicated in the field of animal rescue and human law enforcement. She's the current director of admissions for the SPCA, as well as the coordinator of their outreach programs as well. She also serves as an instructor for the Erie County Law Enforcement and Training Academy and is an adjunct at Medaille College. So Amy, thank you so much for joining us for this presentation. This is a critical topic and possibly one that not a lot of people are considering. So thank you, and I'll hand it off to you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I sincerely appreciate it. This topic is near and dear to my heart, and it's been something that we've worked very hard on, especially over the last couple of years. So, you know, full disclosure, webinars are not my forte, so I apologize if I talk for, you know, a minute and a half and I'm muted, or if I completely screw something up. So bear with me. All right. So today we are going to be here talking about the cycle of abuse and the link between cruelty to animals and interpersonal violence. So I know a lot of us are talking about domestic violence here, and trust me, we will get into that, but that is one very large piece of the puzzle, but the entire pie is that link, and it goes into juvenile violence, serial killers. It really is very complex and all-inclusive and startling as well. Some of the content that's in this presentation may be disturbing. There are some graphic images. We talk about some very uncomfortable topics. So just full disclosure there. I apologize. We try not to dwell too long on any individual slide, but this is a very sensitive topic and it can be a trigger for certain individuals. So what is the link? Simply stated, so the link is going to refer to correlation between animal cruelty and human violence. And that human violence, like we just talked about, is all-inclusive. Is it new? So a lot of people have heard of this. They know that there's a link. You know, is this something that has been here maybe for the past decade? Possibly. Past century? Yeah, this has been identified this was identified a very long time ago. So that quote comes from somebody who lived in the 18th century. So he who is cruel to animals becomes hard also in his dealings with men. We can judge the heart of a man by his treatment of animals. Well, this is certainly not the first time that the link between cruelty to animals and violence towards humans was discovered. William Hogarth, his Modern Moral series, so this again was in the 18th century. He was an English-born painter, he was a printmaker. This was one of his best-known works, the Modern Moral series. He was dismayed by the cruelty that he would regularly see throughout the streets of London. So this is 4 different slides. So the first one is called The First Stage of Cruelty. So the series, the 4-panel series, follows a fictional character by the name of Tom Nero. I hope you can all see my mouse. So this is Mr. Nero here as an adolescent. The first stage is going to depict Tom as a child. It's going to show youths in the area are very comfortable with abuse. They're hanging cats from light poles here, tying a bone to a dog's leg, throwing an animal out of a window, stabbing birds with needles here. And then the worst is seen by Tom Nero, who's inserting a rod into the rectum of a dog while some of his friends hold this animal down. The second stage of cruelty now, cruelty is running rampant in the streets of London. So Nero, who's an adult, is beating his horse. He's a young adult, after it collapsed under the weight of a cart. But back in here, you're seeing bull baiting. There's another overburdened donkey, and there's a child down here about to be run over by a tractor wheel. And then there's the beating of a sheep down there as well. Cruelty and Perfection is the third work in this series. And Nero has embarked on a life of highway robbery. And here, Cruelty and Perfection is going to depict his apprehension after he beat and murdered a pregnant woman. And then the reward for cruelty is the final in the series. And the extended moral of the entire series is that cruel children, if left unchecked by society, will become cruel adults. It suggests that it's a natural progression from Nero's abuse of animals to his life of crime. And then it culminates in the vicious attack of another human being. So only then does the establishment intervene in another act of legalized cruelty, which is hanging. So the final scene here is going to continue the theme, and there's an ironic effect when after the execution, Nero's body is brutally dissected and watched on by lawyers and gentlemen. So it's become clear that this is, this problem was identified, this link was identified centuries ago. So why are we talking about it now? Simply, the link between cruelty to animals and violence towards humans, it's been around forever, but the extensive studies and have only gone back a couple of decades. And now, with technology, and it's much easier to be able to extrapolate data. And we've got, the digital era, we're able to really, we're really able to grab that data and start to sort it out and to look at it. So the FBI, January 2016, the NIVERS system, which is the National Incident-Based Reporting System, began collecting data from law enforcement agencies all around the country on acts of animal cruelty. And that included gross neglect, torture, organized abuse, and sexual abuse. So prior to 2016, though, animal crimes were grouped with all other offenses. So it was really hard, like I said, to extrapolate that data and really take a hard look at animal cruelty and then what that meant. So you're going to take animal cruelty and then you're going to look at a much broader picture and what role animal cruelty is going to play in that. So now, thankfully, cruelty to animals is counted alongside other felony crimes such as arson, burglary, homicide, and assault. I'm sure that many of you that are attending today are familiar with the National Link Coalition. I love that site. It's got a lot of very interesting and very relevant data when it comes to the link between domestic violence, specifically and cruelty to animals. But I really liked this graphic here. Animal abuse really is the tip of the iceberg when it comes to interpersonal violence. And a lot of times, I mean, sadly in general, but it also good too, many times we might be the first people that are in the door. A neighbor is more likely to call on a neglected animal than they may be if there's some violence going on in the home. In one aspect, they're going to say, not my business. But in the second one, they're going to be like, well, they're leaving out their dog outside for days on end. They're feeding it 3 times a week. I'm going to call. So we may be the first one that's walking through the door with something like this. And if there's animal cruelty in the home, the odds are that there's another form of cruelty going on as well. So the breakdown of animal cruelty is important. It can be broken down into 2 main categories, which is active and passive. So acts of commission or acts of omission. And it's really important to differentiate between the 2. We need to look at 2 different types of cruelty because really only one of them is pretty relevant to what we're talking about today. So passive cruelty or acts of omission, it's typified by cases of neglect. So the crime in and of itself is the lack of action rather than the action itself. So you have your starvation cases and things like that. Doesn't mean that it's any less cruel. This can cause intense physical pain, suffering, death as well. So we've got starvation, dehydration, parasite infections, embedded collar, failure to seek veterinary care. So all of the conditions that are listed there, the owner neglected to furnish the most basic of care. So simply feeding the dog in the upper left-hand corner could have completely avoided the condition that that dog was brought into. Same with the lower left as well. The lower right, that dog was attacked by another dog. It had a compound fracture of the femur. So the bone was sticking right out of the inside of the leg for days with no veterinary care. So acts of commission, though, that's going to imply the malicious intent. So there's a deliberate action that's causing very intentional physical pain and suffering. So they're often referred to, at least in the veterinary field, and by us as well, as NAIs, which is a non-accidental injury. So they're very disturbing due to the violent nature of the offense. And this is the one that we're talking about when we're talking about the link between cruelty to animals and interpersonal violence. So this is a warning sign of a much more serious psychological issue. So when we talk active cruelty, beating, this dog was just maliciously beaten by a boyfriend in the home to the point, where we had to seize. Many bones were broken. She's actually doing very well now. She's in a new home. This was years ago. She's doing very well now. Stabbing, burning, hanging, and satanic torture, sadistic torture as well. Those are the acts of active cruelty that we're talking about. So not to bore you too much with stats, but psychology, sociology, criminology studies, they all show that a lot of violent offenders, many of them, committed serious and repeated acts of animal cruelty during their childhood. I'm just going to keep pressing the buttons here. So violent criminals are also 5 times more likely to commit violent crimes against people if they have a history of cruelty to animals as used. So serial killers, they do often start out by killing and torturing animals as children. Nearly 100%, not 100%, there's really no black and white, but the very vast majority of serial killers did start on animals as well. So Edmund Kemper, he was 10 years old when he buried one of his pet cats alive. At the age of 13, he killed his cat with a machete and he hid the remains in his closet. As an adult, he killed his mother and his grandparents and 7 college girls as well. His crimes lasted between 1964 and 1973. Jeffrey Dahmer began killing his neighbor's pets. He impaled dogs, frogs, and cats on sticks. And then he went on as an adult to rape and murder and dismember 17 young boys. Albert DeSalvo as a teen trapped dogs and cats in crates, and then he'd shoot them with arrows. He'd release them, let them attack each other. And then again, as an adult, he went on to kill 13 women. Charles Manson, he tortured animals in satanic sacrifices, and he was responsible for 35 ritualistic murders. He did not commit the murders himself, but he was ultimately responsible. And I don't know how many of you have ever heard of this individual. I really hadn't until I started doing research for classes just like this, for courses like this. This individual slit the throat of small animals, and he would sexually violate their corpses. And he is responsible for 11 murders. He confessed to hundreds of additional crimes. So they think that where they can only definitively tie him to 11 of the murders, he's confessed to, I've seen 100, and I've seen numbers up over 400 different murders. They just can't definitively link him to those crimes. So John Wayne Gacy, as a minor, he set live turkeys on fire using gasoline-filled balloons. Then as an adult, he killed 33 men and boys. So, you know, we talked about Albert DeSalvo, Ted Bundy, Albert Fish. I mean, the list could go on and on. Juvenile violence is one of the most disturbing that I can think of, especially doing what I do. I think I've seen a lot here in 16 years. Juvenile offenders will get me every time. And I think that this is a very, very accurate quote. One of the most dangerous things that can happen to a child is to kill or torture an animal and get away with it. So in 2018, 1,985 children under the age of 18 committed murder. All violent juvenile offenders were known to be abused, and the vast majority of them, again, began abusing animals by their teens. Eric Smith strangled his neighbor's cat, but just at the very tender age of 13, killed a 4-year-old little boy, bludgeoned him to death, sodomized him with a stick, fatally beat him with a rock. Jim Hardy, Pete Rowland, and Ron Clements, these individuals beat a classmate to death with a baseball bat just to see what it was like. They were bored. They didn't know what it was going to be like to kill somebody, so they just decided to go out and do it one day. The quote, and I have it here, I will read it, was in an interview several years after they were found guilty. And Jim Hardy recalls, "I was fascinated by death. I always had this obsession with killing things. I don't know really what it was. Like, when I started out as a little kid, I couldn't just shoot a bird and watch it die. I had to tear it up. They burned a fluffy little dog alive inside an abandoned dryer, and then they stuffed it with weeds, or that was stuffed with weeds and sprinkled with paint thinner." And another quote, "The dog was running around inside, and it's the first time I've ever heard a dog scream. It sounded just like a human screaming. And we just started laughing. It was like a game to us. See how long we could make them live. Then we just step a few times, chuck them off into the weeds, and let them die." So we're talking about cases that have happened nationwide from like the early 60s to, you know, present time. But this is a very real problem right in our own community, right in our own backyard. Just now, let's see, it's 2020, so 2018. My partner and I got a call from one of our friends at EPD, and she was responding to a call about an injured animal. So she called us to go out and meet her. The neighbor, this was a very injured kitten that had ultimately died. And the neighbor was concerned that it was one of the neighborhood kids that was doing it. It wasn't the first time that it happened. They had grave concerns about the mental status of this 12-year-old boy. So we went and we collected the kitten, we brought it back, and our forensic veterinarian at the time did a necropsy. Every single bone in this kitten's body was broken. Blunt force trauma was determined as the cause of death. So we went back and we interviewed the family. And what I can tell you about this individual, his father was amazing. We would not have been able to do what we did in this case had it not been for Dad. So Dad had just very recently gotten custody of his boys. This individual, this child, and his older brother lived with their mother and were viciously abused for years prior to coming to live with Dad. Dad knew that there were issues with his son. He just didn't really know what to do. So he was very open with us. He was 100% cooperative with us throughout our investigation. And he knew that this might be the only way to get his son some help. So he gave us permission to speak with the child. And his initial story was that he tried to help this kitten. And then it just began jumping all over the place, and then it just died. And then as we're talking to this child, he said, yeah, you know what, we had another kitten earlier in the spring, and it died the same way. Don't really know what's happening, don't know what's going on. We said, you did? Well, what happened with it? Well, my dad and I buried it in the backyard. So we got permission from Dad. We found the burial site for the kitten. We picked the kitten up. We brought it back. Same thing. We had our forensic veterinarian look at it, and many of the bones in this kitten's body were broken as well. So we took some photos. They were very graphic. We took some photos of the necropsy. We went back again and we spoke with Dad and the child. And at first, he just kind of played dumb. We put these pictures out on the kitchen table, and this kid lit up like a Christmas tree. He was fascinated by it. He couldn't stop looking at these pictures. He asked to look at them 3 or 4 additional times. And he finally did admit that it was him, that he had anger issues, that he couldn't really control himself, so on and so forth. Full confession. So we touched base with the Child Advocacy Center and got him in for a forensic psych eval. And we were able to watch on CCTV that interview, and it was chilling. It was chilling. This child ultimately, not only did he detail the abuse that he had gone through, and I can't even imagine any child going through the type of abuse that he had endured, fully admitted that he and a friend of his had plans to take a gun to school. And that would have been carried out, according to him, in that coming school year. So thankful for the father and for, intervention and being able to kind of get in there. And I don't know if we prevented it or not, but I do know that this child had serious mental health issues. He's getting the counseling he needs. He was sent to a juvenile detention center that was local. He ended up being transferred to a maximum security due to his level of violence. But he is still under care, and they are working with him to try to rehabilitate. So we talk about school shootings, juvenile violence, a lot of people think about school shootings. So with school shootings, Luke Woodham, he was 16 years old when he killed his mother and 2 classmates. He also injured 7 others in Pearl, Mississippi. So before that, he tortured and killed his family dog. His diary entry read, and I quote, "I made my first kill. We sprayed lighter fluid down her throat. Her neck caught fire inside and out. It was true beauty." Kip Kinkle, he was reported to have blown up cows and decapitated cats. And then he went on to kill his parents, 2 classmates, and wounding 22 more. That was in 1998. This is the very famous Columbine duo. And Harris had smashed the heads of mice with a crowbar, and then he set them on fire, and Keeble did mutilate cats. This was in 1999. They killed 13 and wounded 20 additional in Littleton, Colorado. Kids were aged 13 and 11. They tortured and killed dogs before taking guns to school in 1998, shooting 4 students and a teacher during a fire drill. This individual allegedly threw a cat into a bonfire, and then he went on to kill 3 and injure 5 in a school shooting at Heath High School. And now we look at domestic violence. This course was put together about a year and a half ago, and to this day, I still can't read this quote and not tear up. I'm going to give you a second. this type of psychological cruelty, not only to animals but to individuals, happens all of the time. And this is where we talk about the link between cruelty to animals and violence towards humans. This is different. This is different. It's much more complex when it comes to domestic violence. And usually, you know, I mean, this would be where I would ask, what is the difference? Why is there a difference? When it comes to domestic violence, you know, usually with cruelty, you're going to see a whole bunch of different things. You may see passive acts of cruelty here. You may see an animal intentionally starved in front of, or you know, they're starved out, or they're just left to die. You know, there may be no hands on an animal, but these are where passive types of cruelty may also happen. The animals here are used as a weapon. So psychologically, not only these animals are victims, of course, you know, victims of animal cruelty. It happens with any genre of violence that we're talking about. But the animals here are used as weapons against the victims here as well. So psychologically, there's a much bigger impact with this type. It's a manipulative tool, and they're harmed often right in front of the family. So why might a batter, abuse, or threaten or kill an animal? So honestly, the reasons are endless, but these are some of the most common. So to demonstrate and confirm power and control, to force family to keep the violence a secret, to isolate the victims and children, emulate competition for attention, or eliminate, teach submission, retaliate for acts of dependence. That's huge. Retaliate for acts of dependence, acts of independence is huge, and that's a call that we get quite often. Punishing the victim for leaving, or, you know, threatening to harm the animal if the individual leaves. I think given the audience of today, many of you probably know a lot of these statistics, but nearly 1 million animals are killed every year, injured or killed every year in domestic violence incidents. That number in and of itself is staggering. Animal abuse occurs in 88% of homes that were reported for child abuse. This statistic here says 74% of pet-owning women reported that a pet had been threatened, injured, or killed. I actually do believe that number is quite a bit higher. I've seen it anywhere from like 64% to 92%. An unintended consequence, and what I personally was very surprised about when I first started looking into domestic violence statistics, was that if there's domestic violence going on in a home, if there's children involved or if there's children that are living in the home as well as animals, that the children might actually become the abuser of that animal. And psychologically, they've kind of looked into that, and these children many times are helpless. They've got no control over anything in that house, but they might have control over the pet. So they begin acting out what they're seeing in the home violently on the animal. Again, I think that this number is probably significantly higher than what's recorded here, but it does say approximately 50% of domestic violence victims stay in an abusive home out of fear for what would happen to their pet if they left. I think that number is significantly higher. So in a recent study, 929 victims were surveyed about their experiences. So this is often going to involve dogs and cats, but other animals as well. So we've got, you know, guinea pigs and rats, rabbits, things like that. So they reported that what researchers called alarmingly common and grotesque threats. The threats for some of these individuals included getting rid of an animal or to kill or harm it. Often these animals were harmed in front of the children. They forced their child to kill the pet or to commit suicide if the participant chose to take the pet to the vet instead of spending time with him. 53% of the individuals that were included in this study delayed leaving the abuser out of fear for their pet safety. So we talked about it. You know, this positions the pets not only as pawns to be used in the psychological torture that happens often that accompanies domestic violence, but they're victims themselves and they need protection. So right in our own backyard, again, we're talking nationally, you know, we're talking internationally in many of these cases, but this is a big problem right here, right in our own community. In September of 2019, the remains of the dog were discovered. A child had gone to school and reported that his father had violently killed their family pet in his presence as a threat to what would happen to him if he continued his current behavior. So the child reported that his father had taken the dog into the bathtub, had dragged the child and the dog into the bathroom, put the dog into the bathtub, and split the dog's throat in front of his child, and said that that's exactly what's going to happen to you if you keep going over to your friend's house. Within a week, we got another call. I think this one actually made the news of a father who'd reportedly killed his children's cat. So he hung the cat. There was a noose around its neck, and he hung the cat and killed it from the bedpost of the children's bunk beds. He photographed that and he sent it to his children. Both of these cases of animal cruelty did have a reported domestic violence history in the home as well. When I say right in our backyard, both of those were local, both of those were in Erie County. This graphic right here, when I say right in our own backyard, these photos, these images are screenshots of messages that were sent actually to an employee here at the shelter who was going through, who was a victim of domestic violence. And her ex had come onto the property, had chased her down, and would regularly send her pictures such as this. What you did to me was wrong, and now I'm going to do even worse to you, more is to come. This dog's head will be in your driveway. Especially given, you know, given her chosen profession here, this shook her to her core. And this happened for quite a long time. This went on for quite a long time until he was ultimately finally arrested. So animals are part of the family, which is, you know, kind of goes without saying. 35 of the states, District of Columbia and Puerto Rico, enacted legislation that include provisions for pets to be included in domestic violence orders of protection. Again, that's huge. We can do that here, right in Erie County, right in New York State. Animals can be included on orders of protection. And that is very helpful when we talk about legally what we can do. And it's awful to explain, especially because we talk about how long ago this, you know, the link between domestic, or the link between cruelty to animals and violence towards humans, that's been identified for centuries. But we're centuries later, animals are still viewed as property. So we need to be very careful and make sure that we have the legal authority to seize that animal and refuse to give it back to somebody. So if an animal can be included on a order of protection, that really gives us a little bit more teeth to be able to refuse to return an animal. Because in many of these cases, if there is a victim who is trying to flee a violent situation, if all of the paperwork or any licensing or veterinary records, whatever, are in the abuser's name, our hands may be tied with what we're able to do and to offer. So how are we addressing the problem in our community? Again, we've talked about how this is a national issue, it's an international issue, and that's true. We can deal with it here. We can finally try to take some proactive steps. So about a year ago, just a little bit more than that now, I was contacted by Dr. Otterson from the Niagara Frontier Veterinary Society. So he was looking, he had taken a webinar probably similar to this and was looking to raise awareness on the link with the local veterinary community, what they could do, how vet clinics could step up and kind of become part of the solution. So he wanted somebody to speak on the topic. So he'd asked me if I would do it. I jumped at the chance. I think that this is an issue. We can't solve it by any means. I think that there's always going to be a need for it, but we can offer to try to make the best possible outcome available. Before this, what I can say is that the SPCA, I've been here for 16 years. From the day that I started, we always offered emergency boarding for 2 reasons. One of them was domestic violence and one of them was house fire. And I'll say that to say this, it wasn't good enough. And it's hard to say because, I mean, we're a nonprofit organization. We do the best we can with what we have, but those emergency boarding time limits were 2 weeks. So for anybody who has A, dealt with a house fire, know somebody that does, that has, or B, has worked with a victim for a domestic violence situations, trying to move, the problem doesn't get solved in 2 weeks. They're not, magically able to take on that animal again and live happily ever after. This is a long time. It's a process. So what we were finding, we'd hold these animals for 2 weeks. Sometimes we'd even hold them for 3 weeks, but ultimately it just wasn't good enough. We weren't making a lot of successful reunions, with the family and their pet. So we were looking at ways to make this a little bit better as well. How can we be a better, more proactive part of the solution? So around the same time, we were also contacted by the Family Justice Center, and a donor had stepped forward and wanted to donate money to help remove animals as tools in domestic violence. So I said, well, it's funny that you mentioned that because we're actually sitting down with the Niagara Frontier Veterinary Society and some of their individuals. Why don't we all sit at the same table? We're all looking at the same problem and trying to attack it from different angles. So we did. And at that point, the Western New York Human and Animal Abuse Coalition was formed. So representatives from the SPCA, Haven House, Niagara Frontier Veterinary Society, Family Justice Center, UB Law School, Crisis Services, and SPCA of Niagara all came together to discuss ways that we can keep families together. So the Niagara Frontier Veterinary Society said, okay, you know what? Vet clinics are the way that we can go. So they produced and distributed literature to all participating veterinary hospitals. They have literature directed toward the veterinarians, and they also have literature that's available in their lobbies that's geared toward the visitors. They have business cards that have 4 different phone numbers with abbreviations that they have right in their restrooms often for an abuser, because a lot of times they'll still let victims take their pets to the vet. This is also a really good time for vets to be able to identify those non-accidental injuries that we're talking about. If they know what to look for and know what to identify, then maybe they can help raise that red flag that there might be a problem in the home long before the SPCA or Crisis Services, Haven House, any of those other advocacy groups are able to get involved. We began offering quarterly training to the veterinary professionals, not so much since COVID hit, but we were getting together a couple of times a year. And that would include veterinarians, veterinary technicians, and receptionists. And this talk that we gave, the course that we gave was approved for continuing education credits as well. So it was really a good incentive for veterinary professionals to take part in this. And we covered the services that were offered for domestic violence victims, signs to watch for, ways to help, and again, the link between domestic violence and animal abuse. So we've talked about what we've done for people. Hey, we've pulled people into the classroom. This is what we've taught them. This is great, but ultimately it's just words. What's the actionable part of this? What can we do? So what about the animals? We worked very hard, and I have to say that I'm very, very proud of our animal sheltering program. It's called SAFE, which is Sheltering Animals for Emergency. It's a long-term foster program that's created. So the time limits, those barriers have been removed. We no longer have, 2 weeks. So if there is a victim that's staying in shelter, we now can offer to house their pets for the entire duration of their in-shelter stay. Okay, we're not that good yet. We can't offer long-term boarding for, say, horses and cows. We're not there yet. We're working on that too. We've got a little angle on that, but we can confidently offer boarding indefinitely fur dogs, fur cats, fur pocket pets, exotics, basically anything that you can legally have as a companion animal in your home, we're going to be able to board. We're always looking for long-term foster homes. We did very successfully recruit a fairly large number of foster homes that are dedicated to removing animals from harm's way. So they have opened up their homes and they said, I love the program, I love what you're doing, call me. If you need me, my home is open to these animals for as long as you need it to be. We have gone through the orientation with these individuals, and we are working very hard at finally becoming a little bit more proactive with removing these animals. We want to give victims the best possible chance to successfully leave an abusive situation. And if we can, just for a little while, take the fear for their pets out of the equation and let them know that they're safe and that they're not going to be harmed anymore, we're hoping that we can do our part to help them leave a violent situation. That's all I have.
Amy, thank you so much. It's such an unfortunate aspect of the topic at large, but it's so important that you've talked about it. And I really appreciated you addressing that, in one example, in one instance, and it was a neighbor who noticed something unusual about a young boy and his behavior, and maybe something had happened, and it was that neighbor reaching out and stopping the situation at large. That's how domestic violence, that's how we intervene in domestic violence, having those conversations with individuals. And, it's unfortunate that it's this power and control that continues, that abusers, have to manipulate the pets too. But we're so grateful for you and the SPCA for your work in the community.
Thank you.
At this time, I do not see any questions in our question and answer box. So I'll let folks, if anyone does have a question, please go ahead and type it in. Amy's happy to address it. But I thought maybe at this time, Amy, you could share a story of a family reuniting with their pet. You've worked at the SPCA for 16 years. Have you seen something like that?
I have, and you know what? I mean, again, I do. I've seen some really horrible things, as I'm sure many in a similar profession would. We've seen the worst of the worst of what can happen, but then to see families come in scared and broken, and I remember this family last year had come in. They had their big, meaty, like 100-pound, pit bull. It looked like he had eaten a brick house. He was the sweetest thing, but he was terrified. And he had been the victim of abuse by the abuser for an extended period of time. He was starved, he was beaten, and they left in the middle of the night, and they took their dog with them. They had no plan. They didn't know where to go. They didn't know where to turn, but mom had gotten desperate and said, I gotta go. He's going to kill me. He's going to kill one of the kids. He's going to kill the dog. She put everybody in her car with the clothes on her back, and she just drove here. And she said, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to help. I don't know where to go. And I said, we got you. We got you. His name was Mo. It was Mo the Pit. And we boarded that dog. She was able to find family out of state to go and live with. We had the dog for probably close to 3 weeks. She kept in contact with us all of the time. She was always calling to see how Mo was doing. I'd send her pictures, let her know that he was just fine, that he was getting cookies and belly rubs. And he really came out of his shell here a little bit, which is weird because a shelter environment's not really an ideal place for an animal. But to see this dog actually become scared and then just flourish with attention, and he was just so sweet. And they found a place to go, close to 3 weeks after they had come in. And the day that she came in with her 2 children to come and pick Mo up, to watch these kids like walk in, they just walked in differently. They weren't as meek and mild. They walked in a door with a little bit more confidence. They didn't seem so broken and so scared. And to watch both of them just hit the floor and just start bawling. And Mo, we walked Mo through the door, and Mo started screaming, like that excited, happy dog scream and squeal. This dog, I mean, he peed. He was so excited, so excited, and he just ran to this family, and he, flopped over on his back and his whole body was just wiggling. And it just, that right there is a reason why even now, I worked so hard with this program, because I want to see that. I want to, especially in a world where it's just so much is going wrong, like that is the one thing that really, really went right, and that will resonate with me for the rest of my life.
Absolutely. Chills. At Haven House, we also partner with SPCA for the foster program. However, we have volunteers who are trained and have gone through the background check program. They come to the shelter and they actually have their animals act as foster animals, and for about an hour once a week, the animals come in and are just there for the kids and for the moms. And it's really, I've seen so many moments of a child who's maybe a little more cautious in shelter, but then when they go into the common area and see that dog, they're just squealing and just so joyful. And like you shared, it's just one of those moments that continue to brighten your day and can continue to help you in this work, which is difficult, but so important. A couple questions did come up, Amy, in terms of the training for a volunteer family. Can you highlight what might be needed and necessary for someone to join the foster program, for the SAFE program?
Not a whole lot. I mirrored this program after the SPCA of LA. So we have a foster orientation. You have to, not be convicted of animal cruelty in the past or investigated for animal cruelty. There's not too much criteria other than we need to know where you live, because what we're not going to do is, say a foster parent lives in Amherst. If the abuser also lives in Amherst, we're not going to place a foster animal in the same town or village where the abuser lives, just to minimize the risk of accidentally meeting. But we bring the foster families in to give them the criteria and to explain the program, the need for anonymity, the need to, and the reason behind how and why you can't release where you have your animal, why you have it, why it's being fostered. Because I can never underestimate the desire of an abuser to get back at a victim. So we need to make sure that these animals don't end up on social media. Oh, look at my cute little foster, whatever, I've just got him for a little while. We go over the criteria at length about what they can and cannot do. We also go over, allergies and anything like that. But as far as criteria for the program, there's not a whole lot that they have to meet, other than, a slight background check, just to make sure that they are not abusers themselves, or that they've never been investigated for or convicted of animal cruelty.
Absolutely. Amy, is there any veterinary care for animals who do get brought to the SPCA and stay with you during the time that someone's in a shelter?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a really good question. We actually will do on intake. We're going to do a very thorough veterinary exam, because we need to make sure that these animals aren't victims as well. So we want to make sure that they don't have any underlying or present physical injuries. The animal will be fully vaccinated if they're not already vaccinated, and they'll be spayed or neutered while they're with us as well. All of that is completely free of charge, but we will, as part of their general intake plan, it will be vaccines, a complete veterinary workup, and x-rays, just to make sure that there's no evidence of healing or healed fractures or breaks as well. We want to make sure that they're not victims, but they are, yes, close veterinary care.
That's wonderful. It's so necessary. One last question that came up was, what can someone do starting a program like this in their own area? Maybe this person might not live in Erie County. What can they do?
The SPCA of LA, thankfully, they had all of their ducks in a row. They put this program online. It's very accessible online. I think it's called their ASN program. I think it's their Animal Sheltering Network. And they literally have the how-to PowerPoint presentation of how to implement a program such as this, and community partners that are worth looking at as well. It's important to mention too, I talk about foster homes. Not every animal who comes in here is going to be a candidate to go into foster. So a lot of times, cats and small animals can be, but these animals are also victims of abuse. So there might be significant underlying psychological issues that affect these animals as well. So dogs, not every dog that comes in is going to be able to be a safe candidate to go into foster. So we do also work with a couple of long-term boarding facilities with behaviorists on staff that are willing to open up their doors to animals in need, to work with them behaviorally as well during their stay.
Wow. Well, Amy, I don't see any other questions from our audience, but I do want to remind folks that the SPCA website is in the chat function, so please continue to research and investigate this program if you're interested in becoming a foster parent. And I'm sure, Amy, you'd be happy to provide some contact information too to folks
Absolutely.
who are interested.
Yeah, absolutely. My
Excellent.
contact information is right on the website as well. Main shelter number, extension 224.
Excellent. All right, folks. Well, we have that concludes our second webinar for our Domestic Violence Awareness Month speaker series. Thank you so much. We've ended a little bit early to provide you some extra time during your day. I want to invite everyone who hasn't already signed up to sign up for our third and fourth webinars. They're coming up. Next Thursday is a conversation with Desmond Truesdale and Tara Petty, also from Haven House, who will be joining us talking about how domestic violence impacts our youth and our children and what that does for them and for parenting as well. So it'll be a really fascinating conversation. We're excited for that. Again, Haven House's website is in the chat function, and that number to our hotline is 884-6000. It's right there. Thanks again, Amy. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. And we hope that we'll see you next week. Thanks again.
Thank you very much. Take care.